Hello everybody, my name is Gabriel McArthur. This is Pop Culture Politics. I'll give it a couple minutes for people to join. I know it's a little bit late out there on the East Coast. I'm over here in Colorado, so it's 8:30. Tonight we're talking about American Horror Story Cult. And if you haven't seen this season of the show before, just to let you know, I'm going to try to avoid major spoilers as much as I can, but obviously to talk about the connection that this show has to politics, I'm going to have to go into some of the details. Now, for those of you that have never seen American Horror Story before, it's not for everybody. It's certainly not something I would let, my kid watch, but it's one of those guilty pleasures where it's just wacky. There's gore, there's backstabbing, murder. It's insane. But the first few seasons so far have largely ignored politics. This season, they decided to make it, politics pretty central to the story. So when I first heard the announcement that American Horror Story Cult was going to be covering the 2016 election, I had a bit of a pit in my stomach, because my life is constantly me consuming politics, and every once in a while I like to get a break from that, and I'd like to watch something as ridiculous as American Horror Story, or Rick and Morty, or whatever it might be. Something that takes my mind off of those things. Well, Rick and Morty's a bad example. It brings your minds, it's Rick and Morty's kind of political, but everybody needs to have that break and that escape, that they get away from politics and just kind of, the escapism. That's why, superhero movies are so great, because nothing that's happening on screen, for the most part, has any relation to real life. They decided to take a different turn with American Horror Story Cult. And let's just get into it. So, the main reason I wanted to do this Pop Culture Politics was to look at the influence that culture has on politics, and obviously vice versa. So, the main characters, I guess you could say, of this season of the show are named Allie and Ivy. They're a younger lesbian couple living in a small town, and for the most part they have a pretty good relationship, but Allie has some problems. She has a lot of phobias that she deals with, and the very first episode of American Horror Story Cult, right away, the election results for 2016 are being watched by this small group of friends, and these people are having a panic attack. Donald Trump was just elected president, as I imagine a lot of people dealt with across the country. I know me personally, I had that moment of kind of disbelief, like, this is really happening. But in this show, people are freaking out, especially Allie, and she just starts screaming. And right away, like, not even 5 minutes into the show, they watch Donald Trump win, and then one of the characters that they're friends with starts shouting about Jill Stein supporters. Damn those Jill Stein people, thanks a lot, So immediately what came into my mind was, oh, great. They found a way to inject the punching down into this show. But as you watch the season of the show, it's not so clear that they're particularly picking on third-party voters. It seems like they kind of target everybody and the most extreme versions of each candidate's supporter, whether it be Jill Stein, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, whatever. And the main villain of this show, his name is Kai. He's a younger guy. He's watching the same results that they are, and he's celebrating the fact that Donald Trump has won. So, he starts humping the TV. He's just this extreme, unpleasant character that you can tell right off the bat. He's played by a veteran of the series, Evan Peters. He plays several different characters within this season and the show in general. But you start to see this person, Kai, his role with the community. Obviously, he's up to no good. And early on in the show, he plants a false flag attack involving immigrants, so you start to see what they're trying to get at with this cult vibe and the connection to politics. They're playing on our very real fears of what's happening in America. And one of the first thoughts that I had while I was watching this, especially as you see just how despicable Kai can be, you see that they're really trying to paint this picture of what a Trump supporter is. This angry young man who's just out to destroy the system, had a pretty decent upbringing and somehow still wasn't satisfied or isn't all there in the head or, egotistical, whatever. They tried to pack basically those quintessential Trump supporter characteristics into one person. And I got to tell you, it's pretty scary. Especially when there are moments in the show that they paint him as a reasonable person. Most of the time, he's able to turn on this charm, not unlike Donald Trump, despite the despicable things that this person is capable of. And his goal is to basically create a cult. That's obviously the name of the season. And they really play on that cult aspect. They show David Koresh in Waco. They show Charles Manson. They even create this feminist cult that is somehow tied to the Zodiac killer. It's that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And that's kind of the thing. Even though they're playing on real fears, this show, they're so all over the place and they're so out there that it's really hard to take it seriously sometimes, because they pick up these plot lines that don't really go anywhere. In any case, their main goal, this cult that Kai is creating, is basically to spread fear. He wants to create a breakdown of trust in the community. He forces people into these ridiculous stances. I'm talking about American Horror Story Cult. So if you haven't seen it, we're getting into plot points, so I don't know if that's something that's on your list. So spoiler alert. But this cult's goal is to basically divide the community. And it's pretty similar to what we're seeing happen. You see these hate crimes go up in our country. You see friends break up, basically over elections. Everything has become a fight, whether it's Apple versus Android or whatever it might be. Like, you're starting to see real animosity between people that just doesn't make sense up until now. And this show really plays on that. I mean, it goes to the extreme. There's a lot more murder and gruesome murder involved. It is called American Horror Story after all. So you're going to see lots of blood. You're going to see lots of shocking imagery. And I would wager to say this is not really a zombie movie or a slasher movie kind of scary. What they're getting at is the horror of what's happening in our reality. And I'm still trying to decide if that takes away from the enjoyment of the show. Because like I said earlier, that show's so ridiculous, you watch it because it's comforting to know that these things could never happen in real life. Or most of them. But this show really goes there. One of the things that they play on is fear of mass shootings. I mean, there's a pretty graphic mass shooting scene in this season. It's not in the earlier episodes, but I got to admit, it was pretty shocking. Have a good night, Eric. So what I tried to look at was, what impact is this going to have? I could feel myself, this visceral reaction to some of the things they were trying to point to. And it's such a visceral reaction because you know that it's happening out there. And is that going to create more animosity? Is that going to stoke even more fear in the community, that's something that I never really thought that I would ever have to worry about. I'm the kind of person that for a long time I didn't think like music or video games or what have you has this huge impact on public life. But in these days, it seems like it's just a cascading pile of shit. And you don't know what the straw that's going to break the camel's back might be. I don't mean to sound alarmist, but that's something that American Horror Story cult will kind of inspire in you. This sense of dread that you may have already had, but it's intensified because you have this imagery in your mind of people out there getting killed in the streets and, race war, class war, I mean, well, let's face it, class war is already going on. But, one of the things is they make a false flag attack of a group of immigrants beating Kai. He basically provokes them by throwing stuff at them and hurting them, and they defend themselves. He has somebody wait with a camera. It records just what he wanted people to see, which definitely gets at the media aspect of things, that context can be altered. It can be just slightly changed to make a completely different narrative. And it gets to the point that, immigrants in the community are doubted by people that they've known for years and years and years. And it just hits really close to home. And I don't know if everybody's necessarily going to be able to get through this season. I want to be honest. I mean, some of the earlier seasons of American Horror Story are just, you can't get through them because they're just not good. They're boring, or they're, too ridiculous. But this show, if you've got a weak stomach, definitely don't go for it. This isn't a review, but I definitely want to let you know. And I got to thinking about how intense fear is a factor in our society. We all know that Republicans point to all those commie Democrats and all those commie Bernie Sanders, and then you have establishment Democrats, Russian trolls. It seems like the only way that people are trying to get votes these days is by making us feel afraid of something. And when information comes flying at you in every direction, there's a lot to be afraid of sometimes. So that was the interesting choice that they made, was to play on our real fears. And sometimes that's what horror does best. This season was definitely better than the past few seasons, if not just for the study of the psychology of where this show is taking everybody. This show definitely stokes the fear of white supremacy and white supremacist movements. The cult that Kai creates isn't blatantly white supremacist, but that's what they are. And there's some background stuff of strings being pulled that make no sense and motivations that come out of nowhere. Like, some people join this cult for reasons that really don't make any sense, especially when a lot of these people know what this cult is capable of. But I guess that's up for interpretation. The other thing that I really didn't understand about this show, this season, was, where's the morality? What is it trying to tell us? Is it trying to say that normal people who otherwise would never be involved with these horrific things like shooting nails into people and all these ridiculous, grisly things, is it trying to say that under the right circumstances or under the wrong circumstances, you would join a cult and you would do these things? Now, on a certain level, we all know that's true. I don't think a lot of people went into Jonestown thinking that they were going to die, that that's where it was going to lead them. But I'm sure little by little, they were fed misinformation that was just a little bit credible. And as time went by, they trusted this person more than anyone else. I mean, we know that happens. It happens in religion. It happens in politics. There is this blindness when it comes to certain politicians like maybe Justin Trudeau or Barack Obama. I feel like they're very similar people where they have the charm, they have the grace, but they don't necessarily have the willingness to stand up to these corporate interests. So it seems like every day there's something that we need to be afraid of, whether it's this parade, or whether it's the wall, and I'm not saying that there are not real things to be afraid of, and that's where it gets muddled. How much fear should we ascribe to anything? When it comes to the Russia thing, everybody tells us, especially when we question it, that it's proven, it's done, it's a done deal. We need to be afraid of Russia. But the problem with that is, what can we on the ground actually do about Russia? We can tell our representatives to investigate it, but at the end of the day, what are you and I able to do about the Russian threat? Nothing. So it's a useless fear for us to hold on to, but it's, as you can tell, one of the largest that they're trying to push. So this is something that the show got me going on. I don't know if that's necessarily what their intentions were, but when it comes to fear, even when it comes to something like MMT, people are afraid to think that there is a different reality than what they've been told to believe. Democrats and Republicans play this game where they tell people to be afraid of going over the limit on the budget, or, be afraid of this person taking your tax dollars. The most ridiculous fear is when you hear people say, I don't want my tax dollars to pay for some bum in their parents' basement and their food stamps, or whatever the case is. And it's like, you're automatically going to the most extreme example of what you think can happen. That's fear. And if you use fear to affect your decision making in that way, you're not going to see clearly. You're not going to see that that is a safety net that is for every one of us to take advantage of if we need it. That's why we all pay into it. It's the same as insurance. You don't live your life in fear that you're going to break your leg, but you have that, if you can afford it in this country, but you have, theoretically, you pay for insurance just in case. So it's ridiculous that we have gotten to the point to where we are so at each other's throats about every little thing. And I guess what I want to find out from you is, how are some ways that we can combat this fear? Is a show like this a good wake-up call to let us know, hey, if this gets out of hand, worse things can happen? Or are we justified to be basically afraid 24/7 all the time? Is it productive to do that? So I think I lost my place here. I had a bunch of notes. And here's another thing I want us to think about or ponder. Are we already at the level of absurdity that American Horror Story presents? And does that make it less shocking and just depressing? I mean, Donald Trump wants to send people crates of shitty food instead of food stamps. That's going to lead to malnutrition. There are things to really be afraid of. So I guess what I'm asking from all of you is, number one, how do you kind of calm yourself down from these fears? Because I think a lot of people out there really want to know, how can I go about my daily life when they're trying to frack a well on the corner by my house, when they're pumping crap into my food that I don't understand or that they're not telling us about? At what point do we say, no, we can be afraid, or we can get angry and we can do something about this? Lisa says, I was raised in a cult. Nothing shocks me. Well, I'm going to pose that question to you. Would you say that most reasonable people, under the right circumstances, can be looped into something like that? And feel free to comment. I mean, I'd like to make this a conversation. I know it's late, but I'm curious to see how many of you have actually seen the show. And if you haven't seen the show, I would just, if you can handle it, I would advise you to do it just to try to wonder what effect this could have on society. And do you think that there can be a point? Capitalism is a cult. Damn right. Do you think that there's a point that, because everybody says that they want to see candidates who talk about what we want and what we like and what we stand for, as opposed to the other person, the other person, the other person. But that's effective. I mean, it's proven to be effective. Donald Trump was the worst shit talker out of everybody, and he won. And I know that the circumstances were unique to him. He's been around for a long time, but it seems like the only way to get traction these days is to spark some kind of fear in people that drives them to act. Is there a way that we can get people to act without inspiring them in a negative way? I don't really know the answer to that, but I think it's something that we should definitely try to figure out. But I'm told we have to wait for the next election. That will be too late. That's something too, is you kind of do need to get people to be afraid to actually do something. Like the Dreamers is a good example. You know, I talk to people who otherwise are pretty progressive, and I'm afraid for the Dreamers. I'm afraid that these people who have only ever known this country or have known this country most of their lives are going to be sent to places they don't understand, they don't know. And that does make me afraid. But you try to talk about it with certain progressives and they're like, well, we just don't have the power now. We got to elect Democrats. We got to elect Democrats so that we have the power to do something about this. Meanwhile, the Senate Democrats caved twice on the shutdowns. The second time, Donald Trump said, if we got to have a nice shutdown, let's do that. They could have played that. They could have opened up advertising time. And they could have played that on a loop while they kept the shutdown going until they got the demands that we wanted. But it's clear that's not what they wanted. So that's the thing. I'm telling my progressive friends we need to be aggressive with these establishment Democrats, and they say, well, you got to be patient. And it's like, obviously this person is not living in fear. They are comfortable with what's happening around them, or else they would act. So I recognize that fear can be a good thing, but where's that line? And I want to expand a little bit on the capitalism as a cult thing. Because it's always been odd to me. And this kind of made me more of a socialist. Not really I didn't start out as a socialist. This dogmatic, cult-like view of capitalism has driven me to be a socialist. Because if you even question it a little bit, you're looked at as a crazy person, or you're looked at as an enemy of our way of life. So that's probably the most effective cult of all, neoliberalism and capitalism. We have been patient. And here's the thing. I mean, and I know I'm getting a little bit off the topic here, but a lot of people will tell us progressives, don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good, right? How many times, I know everybody watching this has heard that. And how many times have you heard it? When somebody tells you that, they're trying to shut you down and say, you're never going to be satisfied. That's what they're trying to imply, is that your expectations are unrealistic, you're paranoid, and I'm going to shut you down right now because things are the way I like them to be, or things are going in my direction. And, what I like to say back to them, when they say, don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good, I say, show me good first. then we can talk about perfect, right? I don't have unrealistic expectations. I just expect these people to do their jobs, what's written in paper for them to do, and they're not doing it. So how is that unreasonable? In any case, I appreciate y'all watching, and next time we'll probably be diving into some music, maybe a few different songs, maybe a few different artists. But this has been Pop Culture Politics with Gabriel McArthur. Please like and subscribe and share, of course, and have a good night.